An Alberta Liberal MP is demanding his government halt funding for the Calgary Stampede. This after the Stampede admitted liability in a class action lawsuit stemming from a sexual abuse scandal. The organization admitted to negligence and breach of duty after an employee sexually abused young boys for years, dating back to the early 1990s. That employee was sentenced to 10 years in prison in 2018, but MP George Chahal says Ottawa should hold the Stampede accountable as well. In a statement, he says not a single taxpayer dollar should support an organization that has shown such blatant disregard for the well-being of our youth. Federal funding should only be reconsidered when the victims themselves feel that genuine accountability and reconciliation have occurred. Calgary Liberal MP George Chahal joins me now. Mr. Chahal, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me, David.
So you've written this letter. I'm wondering if you've spoken to anyone in your cabinet, in your government, about taking away the funding for the Stampede, and if so, what reaction you've had?
David, first and foremost, I want to say to the survivors that I believe you and I stand by you. No one should ever go through what you've endured. The courage you've shown in coming forward is commendable, and I assure you that I will advocate for justice and accountability at every level. I haven't spoken to any of my colleagues yet, but I intend to do so, particularly Minister St. Onge and Minister Ian and other cabinet members as well.
Have you spoken with any of the plaintiffs or the lawyer for the plaintiffs and gotten a sense of it, whether this is something that they wanted to see in terms of dealing with the Stampede?
David, my office did reach out to the lawyer to have a conversation, and I look forward to fully engaging with the lawyer and the victims as we move forward. Parents across the country, David, are concerned. We send our kids to school camps and to sporting organizations. I'm a father of 3 girls as well, and we want to make sure our children are protected, that they're not left vulnerable. And what we've seen here is an organization where leaders put their own interests ahead of the commitments of protecting our children. And based on what I've heard, there's a great deal of work that needs to be done and a culture change in the Calgary Stampede so they can rehabilitate and rebuild trust.
So you plan to speak with Marcy Ian and Pascal St. Onge, 2 of the ministers whose portfolios and issues that they deal with would touch on this. What's your argument to them going to be that the Calgary Stampede needs to be stripped of its federal funding?
Well, this organization needs to make sure that they've taken responsibility and accountability. We've seen through with Hockey Canada and other organizations that we need a transparent review of what this organization's done. And we need to make sure that all levels of government are focused in making sure that that accountability and investigation is brought forward. So I'll be asking my colleagues to make sure that any new funding that is asked for by this organization be halted, that we do not fund even a penny moving forward to this organization until that they've worked through working with the victims and making sure that there's a change in their culture and in their organization. And also the folks who have tried to cover this up, that they also acknowledge and resign their positions. And this is the type of actions that I'm looking forward to.
Do you know how much money we're talking about here? I know the money for the Stampede has fluctuated over the last couple of years because of the pandemic and the need for extra supports because of those specific circumstances. But how much, what kind of dollar amounts are we talking about here?
Our government's previously invested significantly in the Calgary Stampede, recently $4.5 million with the SAM Centre through the wage subsidy program and through the Canada Summer Jobs program. These are a few of the programs that we have. We've also made a tremendous investment in the BMO expansion. We will honor our previous commitments, and we should, but moving forward, a new programming, new funding, we should halt all funding to this organization until they take action, full responsibility and accountability, and work with the victims to ensure that justice is brought forward and served.
So on that, taking responsibility and accountability, they have admitted in court there's an admission of negligence and a breach of duty in failing to stop this former employee for abusing young people. They say that the Calgary Stampede takes responsibility in the hopes of helping the victims to heal. We can't change the events of the past, but we are deeply sorry for how the victims have been affected, and they're working out a compensation settlement that will be negotiated over the summer. Is that not what you want to see them do? I mean, that seems like an admission of responsibility and then a cash settlement. Is that not enough?
David, they recently, just several months back, had denied responsibility. And this is a court decision where they've acknowledged this. But so much more needs to be done to rebuild trust in our community, to make sure that this organization internally is focused on making the changes to protect our community, our children in the future. This is a change in the way their organization is run that needs to happen. And that's what I'm focused on, that they are making efforts to make sure that internally they've made the changes and that they've worked also with the victims in making sure that in the future this never happens again. There's so many children in our community that participate in this organization, and they've had a long history here in our community. But what's happened here is years of cover-up and denial, with over 70 children directly impacted with this atrocious crime that's occurred. And as a father, as a community member and leader, we need to make sure our children are protected.
No, I got two little boys myself, so I completely understand that sentiment. I just wonder, though, with this admission in court, if they do as best they can by the survivors, and these resignations you're calling for, and the restructuring of the way they operate that you're calling for, if they meet those if they clear those bars, you would be okay with federal funding going back then, but not until those standards are met. Is that your position? Am I characterizing that properly?
Definitely, but I also want to make sure that the victims have an opportunity to be heard from, and that the organization understands how much of an impact that this has had on them. This organization needs a full-on review on internally and how they conduct themselves and how they deal with matters with the community and with their subsidiaries internally. That's what I'm focused on, and I want to make sure that the victims, we work with them, but we should have a transparent investigation and make sure that they are moving forward to make sure that they take full responsibility, accountability, and a change of culture. We've seen recently with the challenges with Hockey Canada and the amount of work that needs to be done. I want to make sure that this work is done so no child, nobody in the future is ever impacted with something like this horrific crime.
Calgary Skyview MP George Chahal, thank you for your time.
Thank you, David.